All right. Anyone online, can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. So much sorry about that. Always difficulties here.
Any further comments, please?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Kent Rowe, 3353 North 159th East, out in the county. I had the honor of being the keynote speaker at Earth Day for WSU this year. And I want to kind of follow on to Harold's comments, is that we emphasize for Cool Cities campaign, until the trees can mature and grow in places where you really need them, grasses can be planted rather easily, low cost, minimal amount of water, and provide shade to various regions, areas, parking lot. Instead of the hellscapes that we build in this area of parking lots, black asphalt and concrete that is very difficult to traverse, and especially in the summer, that create heat islands that some attribute storm contributions to. The grasses can augment a lot of shade. They break a lot of wind. And we see this now going on, the tall grasses especially in our area, and it can emphasize how we can utilize what grew here for millennia. As far as coverings for parking lots, block type parking lots interspersed with grasses that you can drive over, that absorb crankcase oil, transmission fluids, and such as that, until we transition fully to electric vehicle fleets. These kinds of measures, and I have slides on this, if anyone cares to, I put them out on the public view, Earth Day, Wichita State University. So these kind of measures can be done at lower cost, even more so than all the concrete and such that we feel we have to stay with some kind of protocol that's not necessary. So this can be started and implemented very, very quickly, early, with a minimal amount of water. So thank you.
Further comments?
Can I respond to that
Yes, sure.
just
Go
really
ahead.
quickly? It's a lovely idea. It's not quite that straightforward, though. The zoning regulations require concrete and asphalt, so there would have to be a change there before we could move on to actually doing it for most development.
Mountains we've done before.
I'm all in favor of moving mountains. I'm just saying it's not simple.
Any further comments? All right, then we'll move on to the next part of our meeting, and that's the tree policy review with Dr. Altman and Adam from the mayor's office.
That's you, the voice.
Yes.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Troy Hauptman. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation, and with me is Adam Nebenzel. He is a fellow from the City Manager's Office, and he's been tasked with a very important job, and we're working together on this idea, talking about moving mountains. Yeah, this has been one of the things that we really want to work on in regards to improving our tree canopy throughout the city of Wichita. So let me go ahead and get started. One of the things that's been happening, actually, we've been working on this for several years. We've been talking about this over and over again. And what really came to light this past fall was actually a few trees that were removed during one of our projects, during a water project and another project as well. And it really came to light some of the things that were missing within our operations and within our policies to take care of trees. And So Chris Pompelli from the Park Board asked us to do some comparisons with other cities. And we did a presentation. Adam did most of the work, actually. And we compared our ordinances and policies with other cities. And we found that while other cities were pretty robust, we were not. And we found a lot of things that we were really missing within our ordinance and in our policies. Currently, we don't have a tree survey policy. We don't have notification for tree removals on public property. And there's been some significant gaps in regards to removing trees and plantings when we are doing special projects. And also when we're also removing trees that have aged out, they've gone through their life cycle, or there's some other issues in regards to they may be dangerous trees. So with some of the lacking of funding, we are at a deficit in regards to planting new trees with trees that are being removed. Over the past 10 or 15 years, our statistics show that we've been removing more dead trees than actually planting live trees. And so this comes to the point where we want to do two things. We really want to protect the live trees that we have and find ways to protect the trees that we have and avoid those tree losses. And then eventually actually adding more trees to our canopy. So this policy that we've been looking at and working on really has three goals that we really want to focus on. And we want stronger reviews to avoid tree loss. And we want that as we're going through construction, through even just proposals of new facilities, new amenities, new streets, new roads. And so there's got to be a way of us being able to do that. We want to come up with notification of trees that are going to be removed in these projects, and we want the public to know about it. That was one of the big concerns, is that we did some projects and nobody knew that we were removing trees, and it was just a complete shock. And so we want to make sure that we put a situation where, in the case where we have to remove trees, we want to make sure that we are being very transparent and that that information is placed out in the public. So we do know that we're a growing city. We do know that we're going to have to make upgrades, repairs. There's always going to be new infrastructure being put in place. So we do know that trees are going to have to be removed from time to time. So when we do that, we want to put a situation, a policy in place, operations in place, that if we are removing trees, we want to make sure that we're replacing those trees at other locations. Adam's going to talk a lot about that process, and he's also going to talk about maybe those trees don't go back in the same place, that they go at other places where we know that they will be survived and taken care of in the long term. But this is all about taking care of our canopy. So not only is it important to plant new trees, but also protect the trees that we do have. So how do we get here? There's a lot of different avenues that we talked about getting here, and this conversation started several years ago. But more recently, back in the fall, going through the park board, we were able to start the conversation. And as I mentioned, we were able to compare our policies and other ordinances with other cities. And it was really helpful in doing that, and kind of really opened our eyes at some of the things that we really need to address. From that, we really wanted to start coming up with an idea, and this is the policy of those three goals that I mentioned earlier, really kind of focusing on what can we do as a city. Harold mentioned there's a lot of other areas that we need to improve on, but as a city, as city operators taking care of our city property, we wanted to come up with a plan to make sure that we are setting the example, that we are able to do what we can to protect the live trees, and if we are taking trees out, that there's going to be replacements. So we really sat down and talked about a policy, and we have some initial drafts, and I think we've shared that with this board and with some of the other. And we met with some experts from downtown Wichita, Schellenberger Development Company, K-State, WSU, and working with internal departments as well. So we've met with the park board, we met with MAPC Advanced Planning, and now we're meeting with you. We have some other opportunities to meet with the DABs. We're going to be providing them some information. We're going to be meeting with some other stakeholders in neighborhood meetings. And I just recently accepted an invitation to present at the Bike and Ped Board as well. So we're really kind of trying to get this information out. So what does this policy include? There's a lot of nuts and bolts. We're not going to try to overwhelm you with a lot of details, but there's a lot of details in this that's really kind of important. So Adam is going to go through all that, and then we'll be available for questions at the end.
Thanks, Troy. So yeah, I'll be speaking kind of in depth, not in depth, an outline of what kind of each section will be of this policy kind of moving forward. So I think the most important thing that we're stating right off the bat is the application. So for this policy, it's a tree policy that will apply to city development only and city property and city rights of way. It will not be included for private development or for projects that take special assessment projects that work with the city. As we look towards development, and we kind of took an outline of what our engineering department goes from design to construction. So when development design begins at around the 10% plan stage, when about 10% of the concept design of an engineering project is fulfilled, staff typically goes out to the district advisory boards, and they go also to the city council for approval of that concept design. Where our tree policy takes place is in between the 10% plans and the 80% plans. After the concept has been approved by the DABs and the city council, a tree survey will be conducted to understand what is the current health of the trees, among other things that I'll get into in the next few slides, as well as a tree canopy plan. What trees are going to stay, what trees are going to be planted. And I'll go in again into more depth in the next few slides. But after that 50 to 80% plan range of engineering projects are established, public engagement will then occur again at the district advisory boards, at city councils, at forum, on forum, which is our new civic engagement website, as well as any other relevant boards and commissions, say the sustainability board or bike and ped board. They will come and kind of explain what that situation is. After that, construction will begin, and informal public engagement process will occur throughout. So as we look at this engineering project, we are just adding added layers to the engineering process for building and designing of new locations and new projects. So as we look towards this tree survey, what will it include? So it will include the common or botanical name of each tree on site, the trees that were going to remain and trees that are going to be removed per the site analysis. What is the condition rating of each tree? If a tree is staying that's in good condition, will it have to be in 10 to 20 years come back to require maintenance? Grows, are there typical types of grows? Maybe there's a bunch of apple trees in an area. Any offsite tree or root protection zone that could be adversely affected. We don't want our construction to go into a project not knowing where the other trees, another tree that's outside the project area, to go in and accidentally hurt the roots. That tree outside the protection area will then have to be removed if it damages the trees too far. So understanding where it's like a gas pipeline. You gotta know where the gas is, you gotta know where the tree roots are. What are the location and dimensions of the established and proposed perimeter landscaping? That's kind of your net buildable area. Where can we plant the trees moving forward? As well as what are the critical areas and buffers? Are there wetlands in the area that technically per EPA regulations you can't actually affect or touch? What stormwater tracks are there? What are the limits due to construction? So a lot of that information will go towards the tree canopy plan. So that will be a statement or multiple statements and kind of layout of describing what trees will remain from this project, as well as specific actions of how the trees will be identified, how they will be marked, and how they will be protected before the start of and during construction. From there, the tree protection program will be drawn to scale of the project. So that means understanding what trees, when they're fully grown, will be taking up that area, rather than just saying, oh, we're sticking a little tree here, and then in 20 years, it's actually going to be a big tree, and it shouldn't have been there, and they're too close. So we're understanding where exactly trees are going to be laid out. What is the exact location, common name, botanical name, and caliper of each trees that are going to be planted? So at that point, how many trees are going to be planted in there? What size are they? For the public to know, to be transparent in that process. What is the site minimum tree density calculation, showing that process of how do we get to how many trees are going to be planted? I'll go into that detail a little bit more later. What is the site replacement tree calculation with an explanation? So how did we get there? Why are we choosing that? Identification of any protective barriers. If we're close to the Arkansas River, are we putting wire mesh around the trees to ensure that beavers don't damage the tree? As well as visual documentation. We want to show the rest of the public what the tree is situation. We want to show that we're not just taking a tree down because we say that it looks like it's dead and needs to be removed, but it actually was a healthy tree. We want to have that paper trail there, so we are accountable. So as I mentioned, tree planting requirements. So we're establishing a minimum tree density for each site and hopefully for the city as we move forward. That it will be 30 units per acre. Now a unit varies depending on what is the caliper size of that tree. So the bigger the tree, the more units that's worth. If the number, and this 30 units was established as a median number of the 11 cities that we originally looked at. So other cities, maybe like Austin, Seattle, had much higher requirements, while other cities like Fort Worth or Derby had lower or none at all requirements for units per acre. So if the 30 units is not achieved in that area of the construction site, you must replace those trees with a certain amount of trees to reach that 30 units per acre. Now, as Troy mentioned, sometimes an area doesn't allow you to be able to plant trees in that location. So as you can see here, this is one project that the city is actually kind of working on, and we're piloting this new tree policy as we move forward and making what the policy baseline here is, and then strengthen it from our community feedback. As you can see here on the left, you can see the green, which is technically stormwater tracks. Then at the middle and that orange is a lot of telecommunication line. The red, I believe, was a gas line, or the yellow. I'm not an engineer. I don't really remember the colors. But on the right side, what is key here is the 4 to 5 tree possible location. Now, depending on the size of the project area, maybe it requires 10 trees to be planted. And so what is good about this policy is that instead of only 4 to 5 trees being planted there, we're going to establish a tree bank that will be factored into the project with labor and irrigation added cost. And that tree bank, that amount of money will be dedicated towards the budget of that project. So if the 4 to 5 trees at 10 can be planted there, the other 5 to 6 will be able to be planted in a different location. Now, you might be asking, well, where does the city plan on planting those? And Harold has brought up the idea that we need to understand where our trees are currently located. And everyone knows that Nina is currently working, and Public Works is currently working with NASA to identify high heat areas, or will be working with them in this coming June to establish high heat areas and locate that in the city. What we plan on doing with that data is overlaying that with median income, overlaying that with other factors to understand where are the high heat areas, where are the locations that we need to plant trees, and we will establish a priority list of those areas so that we can ensure that we're equitably planting trees throughout the city. We overall want to lower the urban heat island effect. We want to do it in an equitable way. Currently, we felt that the penalties for damage and destruction of trees was not high enough. What you currently see in the current per statute is if you damage a tree without allowing for a permit, you can receive a fine up to $200 and be imprisoned for 30 months. We did not feel that the imprisonment was justified, but we definitely felt that we needed to increase the consequences should you affect a tree. So these penalties will be only fine for city trees, as we've kind of mentioned with the rest of the project, but the calculation will be based on base value, cross-sectional area, species classification, what is the condition of the current tree, and where is it located. We will be setting a minimum value current fine standard of $200. Through our other public engagement, what we've been noticing is that we also need to include, and we'll be getting data for this, is we also need to include in that fine what is the cost to plant a new tree, the labor required, as well as what is it the cost to do irrigation. So that has been something that has been mentioned, and we do need to go back and look at that. Harold has also mentioned other apps that have been really helpful, and he actually mentioned that there has been practices that have been updated recently. And so we will be going back and making sure that we are using the most updated practices. ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, I believe, has a new updated third revision of their 10th edition. And I think we are using the original 10th edition that came out about 2018. So as of 2021 or 2020 of October, there's new updated standards for appraisal of trees. And so we need to go back and ensure that we are using the most updated standard. So this is just to show that we are using this project is currently a baseline, and we want the feedback of the public and from boards and commissions to ensure that we can make this policy stronger and better. However, if damaging a tree, and so let me go back, when calculations are based on this, this is the requirement of a tree that needs to be removed. Does someone hurt a tree so badly that we need to either cut it down, or did they destroy a tree where they actually removed it? We don't even know what type of tree it was anymore. If you, as per current statute, you're allowed to, any member of the public is allowed to apply for a permit to alter trees on areas like right-of-ways that maybe disturb what they want. And if the permit is approved, they're allowed to go and make those alterations. If you go and make an alteration with the proper permit and proper approval, you will not be penalized for damaging or altering a tree. If a tree is altered or damaged in a way that you did not receive approval, and it does not require us to remove the tree, we are keeping that fine of not more than $200 there. Now, we also wanted to kind of tackle maintenance, planting, and removal best practices. So on our website, we're going to be on the city website, the Park and Rec website, we're going to be promoting what does the city currently do as best practices. We want to be held accountable and we want to be transparent in our practices. So if you ever see a contractor that is doing improper practices, if you see one of our own staff doing improper practices, we want to know, we want to be held accountable, and we want to promote what the best practices are. We also want to promote the best practices. So if you ever hire an arborist to come do work on your own home, are you getting proper work, or is possibly a tree going to fall down on your house because the arborist is not doing the right safety standards? So we want to be able to promote what the best practices are, so people are aware of what those best practices are, and they can go out and do work on their own should they decide to do that, or hire the right person with the right credentials. We want to emphasize that we're not mandating any specific ways of maintenance, planting, and removal for private property or development, but it is just the promotion of best practices so people are aware. Finally, the program that one that I might be most excited for is the institution of a heritage tree program. This heritage tree program, as currently stated, will only be for city trees again, but anyone from the public may apply for for a tree to become a heritage tree. We're developing that application right now. Once the policy is improved, we will let that out and people can apply for those trees to be heritage trees. To receive that status, a tree must exceed in size what's commonly found in that area for the species and diameter and canopy spread. And then once the tree is listed as a heritage tree, it requires an administrative variance from the Director of Park and Recreation prior to removal. We've received feedback from council that they would also like the Parks Board to play a factor in that as well. So that would be something that we look into as well. Applications for a tree to become a heritage tree will be sent to the Park and Recreation Director, who will review and bring acceptable applications to the Park Board of Commissioners. The board will then have the discretion to determine if the specified tree can be deemed a heritage tree. And then we will post that on our city website so that anyone can look to find out where those trees are. Maybe they want to go and visit them. Maybe there's a story behind that tree. Councilmember Bluebaugh talked about a tree that was really important to District 4 and had a story behind that. So if he wanted to label that a heritage tree, we could learn about the history of that tree and how important it is to our community. So that kind of wraps up what kind of we're trying to achieve with this tree policy. We want to get all your feedback when we're kind of hand it up to Troy for a kind of wrap up, and then we'll take questions and feedback.
So again, we're really focusing on what the city does with our operations and our property. Now, the issue is much wider than that, and we really like the other municipalities in the county to really see what we're doing. And we'd love to see some of the other municipalities, whether it's Derby or one of the other ones, to really take a look at this, and hopefully they can adopt this with their processes as well. And the county as well, because the county is very much involved in infrastructure throughout the county. The other part of this too, and we've talked about this, is that city property is only probably about 10 to 15% of the total canopy across the city, or across the county, it's even less. So where's the other part? Well, it's in private property. It's in different businesses. When I drive by and look at, I drive by the airport and I see Cessna out there. They have these huge swaths of property that they're mowing. At least there's grass there. But it would be great to see if they could put in some trees in there as well. But all these private homeowners, they really need to look at putting in trees. And if there's any way we can incentivize that and really kind of look at that, that would be great. That heritage trees in their property, that would also increase the value of that property as well. So in looking at this and really kind of the two-prong approach is actually getting more trees in the ground. We talked to Greg Ferris. Actually, we had this conversation just a little while ago about giving away trees. And so what we're going to be looking at, I found out that we could probably, for $5,000, we could give out 3,500 seedlings. And so I might actually be looking at trying to get $10,000 from my budget to get 7,000 seedlings to give away this next planting season, so people can put that in their yards and put that on private property. But anything that people can do to plant on their private property will be hugely helpful in this situation. So it's not just falling on the shoulders of forestry. It's not just falling on the Parks and Recreation Department. It's not just falling on Public Works and the city as an organization, but it's the whole community. We really need to start talking about this in a bigger setting. So I just wanted to give that information to you. And we're available for questions. But more than anything else, I just wanted you guys to be aware that we are working on this. And this is something that we recognized several years ago. But at late, I've been seeing some momentum and I've been able to seize it. And the city manager put Adam on this on the case as well. So Adam has been doing a lot of the legwork that I just don't have the time to do. And it's been great for him to learn a lot about this as well. He's got a passion for this because he's got a background in this as well. But we're available for any questions.
Before you got here, like 20 years ago or so, there was a tree growing out station north of Wichita where you could buy 10,000 little seedlings, put them in the ground, wait a few years, and then they were big enough to put on public property without being run over by a lawnmower. Are there any plans or has there been any discussion about establishing a city tree growing out station just for the economics of it?
So as I mentioned, two-pronged, protecting the live trees that we have now, putting more trees in. Gary Ferris, our forester, we've been talking about some other programs in regards to bare root trees, ways that we can, with less finances, pay for bare root trees, get them in the ground, and they have a little bit of a better survivability rate, but they take some extra care as well. So he's coming up with a program of how we can do that, and we're looking at different resources to work on seedlings. We still have our nursery as well, and we've been getting seedlings and getting them a little bit bigger and stronger and planting those as well. But just a quick shot in the arm of getting trees in the ground using seedlings is a way of doing that. Now, they all don't survive, and that's one of the issues is the survivability rate is between 40 and 60%. Just depends on that season of rain, just depends on whether there's a drought and all that kind of stuff. But that is one of our strategies, and that's what we're going to try to work on, not just giving away those seedlings, but also using that within our parkland as well, within our own plantings. Hey, Michael.
Am I correct in understanding that the policy then only covers property that's about 10 to 15% of the overall tree cover, right? Since Wichita did not have any kind of policy previously, did you find that that was true in the other cities that you looked at? Did they have the same kind of limited policy that was not comprehensive? It didn't include everything?
So there's some that are very robust and have ordinances that dictate in regards to how development is conducted, requirements in regards to tree removal. We were just talking about, the mayor was just talking about this. And I forgot to mention, yesterday we had a great meeting with council in a workshop, and we got a lot of information back, and we shared a lot of information with them as well. But where I came from in Austin, very robust tree ordinance. And if you needed to remove a tree that was 14 inches or larger, you needed a permit. So they would remove the tree when it was at 13 inches. So unintended consequences come from some of these stricter ordinances. But the idea is we need to find ways, different ways to protect our trees. And it's always easy to remove a live tree, But we need to find ways to protect them and find ways to save them and make sure people understand what the value is.
So of the trees that you are hoping to do the seedlings of and all that,
Mhm.
are they trees that are native to the state?
Yes.
Okay, that's important because they're more drought tolerant, so that would be.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing right now, and I notice this every time I drive around, a lot of our pine trees are turning brown. And whether they're native or not, the other part that we need to pay attention to is whether they're susceptible to disease or not. And those pine trees are just getting wiped out. So wouldn't make sense to go that direction, but we need to, not just whether they're native, but whether they're resistant to disease. And we have experts. Mr. Ferris is very good at that. So that's part of the plan.
Sanitary problem also can be contributed to climate change.
Yes.
I will say though, native is one of those very flexible words, you know, native to this county, native to the state, native to the prairie, native to the Midwest. And working to have to specify trees for specific projects, sometimes it's incredibly difficult to try and find a native tree that will fit the space, do the job, provide the look that the landowner wants. So the extra flexibility of using non-native species, which given worldwide biological transfer at this point, it's all one biome anyway. If they're disease resistant and drought tolerant, most of us will just say, you know, good, better a live tree than no tree at all, or a dead tree.
I'm just concerned about the Bradford pear problem that we have.
Here, here, cut them all down.
So in appendices of this, we list acceptable trees that we're specifying, and that one is not it. I can guarantee you. So we're good. And there's people are complaining about the eastern red cedar as well. And I have to go back. It might be included in the policy right now, but I will be removing that if it is. So just a heads up on that one.
I was just wondering, this 30 units standard that you're going to apply to the public areas, why wouldn't that be something that should be applicable to areas that developers that are getting city money loaned to them in these special deals? Why couldn't they be held to the same standard?
So we asked that question and we've been sharing that with council, and that might actually get fleshed out a little bit more. But there's some things that we get direction from council that they want to see that and work with. But that was our question as well. And it's something that we want to see as well.
Excuse me, but there are subdivision regulation requirements for, you know, like 1 tree per 40 linear feet of street and trees for screening. There, when a plat gets done for a subdivision, there's actually quite a few tree requirements built in already. Not to say we couldn't do more, but.
And with that also is a lack of enforcement from our part because of lack of resources, lack of staffing, lack of time. And so that's part of this whole endeavor as well, as part of the equation, is to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, but also there's already ordinances in place. We need to make sure that those ordinances are being adhered to as well. And so it's not necessarily part of this policy, but I think it's part of the message that we're sharing with the rest of our organization is, you know what, we have ordinances in place. Let's make sure that we are enforcing them as well.
I say I'm happy to hear that you're looking for a public education segment in this. One of the problems that I'm sure city MEP staff could tell you about is, so there's a plat and business owner for a fast food restaurant or whatever, to plant so many trees and so many bushes, and a year or two later, they're all gone. We can force them to plant them, but we don't have to force them to water them or take care of them or not accidentally run over them with a lawnmower. So if they don't want them there, they won't be there sooner or later. So we have to somehow convince people that they have value.
It's the same problem that we see when conditional use permits are requested, that they have to do the screening and they don't take care of them. I have across the street from my house. They don't care if they take care of them. They don't care.
I just want to ask about the fines. you were saying that the original statute or whatever had a $200 fine and actually a prison sentence, right?
It was up to $200 and could be in prison, but that's honestly, it's what the judge decides in that situation.
I was just curious, when was that done? What year? Any idea?
I could look on Muni code and it could tell me when that statute was passed, but I do not. tell me.
The reason why I asked that is because the fine is still $200, right?
Up to, well, no, that's the minimum.
Well, that's a minimum of 200.
We're
Okay.
making it a minimum.
So the other one was a maximum of 200, and now we're starting as a minimum of 200.
Yes.
Because I thought surely the value of trees has increased, today from what it may have been whenever that was established. So if it's the same fee, it should be higher.
It could date back to the 1800s. We're working with the city of Clearwater, and like the 7th ordinance the city ever passed back in like 1882 was a requirement for trees to be planted and taken care of. Because back then, this was all prairie and people really appreciated trees. Now people have trees and therefore they kind of take them for granted, but.
We've had a couple of situations where we've had some drivers that were not driving very well. And they decided to visit some of our green spaces and took out some of our trees. So through police reports, we've made claims and we've actually probably collected on 10 cases where they damaged or actually took out a tree. So this, I think, is going to be a lot more comprehensive and it's going to give us more teeth to go after folks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just curious, I'm pretty excited about the policy and moving forward with it, but just wondering, I know in our experience, I'm in the design side of things, just what we've seen happen in public right of way is just not having the budget to maintain it and that kind of thing. And just wondering, how does that interrelate to this policy?
So right now, what we're looking at in regards to the public right of way, the homeowner that's near it or the business that's near it is also partly responsible for taking care of that. So that's not changing. We just want to find more ways of protecting those trees that are in those places.
I'm thinking more like on arterial roads and that kind of stuff. Are you gonna push that off to HOAs or what happens if there's not an HOA? But I mean, we've done numerous public improvement projects that the landscape just sort of falls away on CIP type projects.
So yeah, I think a lot of this as we're talking to engineering and folks from all the design aspects, planting the right tree at the right place. And you saw a couple of examples of what that would look like and where we shouldn't be planting trees. But I think, again, fundamentally, we're going to be looking at the landscaping designs, having more robust activity in there and supporting that. So as we talk with Gary Jans, who's managing all of our street CIP projects, this is going to be an opportunity to actually add more money into that to help support adding more trees into locations.
I just assume that there's going to be a budget, more personnel to even go out and do it. Because in another instance, there's a sidewalk I'll use, and I probably would have got about a $5,000 fine because I went and trimmed all the branches down so I could even walk down it. It's those kind of instances that I'm wondering who's going to trim the trees, who's going to make sure it's watered, who's going to cut the grasses, who's going to.
So you're talking about operation.
Right. I mean, I know you guys will do that, but I mean, how much conversation is being had asking that question? Because I think until that's answered, you can plant as many trees as you want, but it may not be a successful program.
So one of the things we talked about yesterday with council, that was very specific about making an ask without asking. But one of the examples I put out was right now in a cycle to maintain and trim trees, we're talking about for forestry, they might go trim a tree and it'll be 37 years before they go trim all the other trees to come back to that. That's way too long. So when I was in Austin, the cycle was anywhere between 5 and 7 years to come back. Now, the reason why that is, it's because of lack of staff, because of lack of equipment, because of the lack of support and funding for that. So my message yesterday was we can plant a lot of trees, but we still need to maintain them. And that's part of making sure that they stay healthy. So every year through our budget requests, we ask for more funding. There's other priorities, but we always ask. And last year, we actually did get a little bit more money back. And we're going to continue asking. Now, as we start planting more and more trees, the demand for maintaining them, it's not just about removing the dead trees, but also maintaining the trees that we have, and we continue to ask for resources.
I would just continue to say, hey, there's a lot out there that, I mean, it's not starting from right now and growing that budget. There's a lot of stuff out there now, and it needs to be taken care of just to kind of get it to baseline, I think. My encouragement is keep pushing for a budget
Yeah.
that can actually do it.
And I think what Troy talked about with handing out the seedlings too, and I think to go further than that, I think we need to establish those public-private partnerships where if people sign up, we can create a fund or using that bank that we have, we can create a fund where people can sign up for a tree. But to ensure that they do that, they also say that they're going to maintain it. And so to that situation, so that way maybe there's less responsibility on the city, and more equal opportunity that we help give you the tree and then you maintain it. So kind of figuring it out.
I know something like that is, we do development work in the Schellenberg, we work with them, but on 29th Street there between Tyler and Mays, there's those medians that the city put in. And I think we work with the city to connect that and get those irrigated.
Yeah, he pointed that out to me when I went and actually met with him. He drove around kind of so I can get a more understanding of what does the private development go through and all that. And he said, and I was thinking about that, and I didn't tell Troy this, but I was like, we could utilize that as an area of planting, kind of going along the medians and make it looking like a nice parkway area for people to drive down and beautify there. So yeah.
One more comment. We asked for funding as a department. But Parks and Recreation, I'm sorry, the Board of Park Commissioners can ask, the Sustainability Board can ask, a lot of other people can ask as well. So the more people ask, the more leverage I have.
I just think the policy is great, but it's critical to be able to spend money to actually make it. I haven't seen that in the past, so that's going to be imperative.
Nina, are we taking questions from?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like Jennifer has a question.
Yep.
She is a member of the board.
Jennifer, do you want to ask your question? Do you have it on chat? So Jennifer, I don't know if your audio is working, but if you want to put it on chat, that seems to be working, and we'll check the chat. Answer your question. Yes, ma'am.
I understand in the past that Evergy provided $5 million a year to trees. That doesn't seem to be current. Can you give a history of that, or are you aware of that?
I'm very much aware of that. And I'm not sure if that's the total amount. Part of it is from franchise fees that we get from them. And that's actually built into the budget of forestry. So it's actually used to pay for staff, to pay for materials, to pay for equipment.
I also just wanted to make a note, there's a lot of funding coming out through EIL that could potentially fund tree planting as a form of hazard mitigation. So as we're looking at extreme heat and weather events and sort of that narrative, that's a potential for securing funding in the future for staffing or just paying for trees.
So one more comment as well. So you mentioned Evergy. I did have a very special visit from Kansas Gas last week. And one of the things that we really need to spend a little bit more time is talking with all our utility folks. I would include a communications and within the city water utilities, because they all use from this property, and we need to kind of flesh out a little bit more about what's expected and how's it going to impact them as well. So that's another part of this that we're still working on as well.
Just another thought too on the CUPs where they're required landscaping and all that. And I get it that this is all on public ground and that's private, but those private folks are required to have those plantings. And they're, you know, I know that's tough to regulate and make them get done. So it'd be nice to understand how this does relate, because on those CUPs, that's, they got big expansive parking lots. They're really some of the big, you know, the biggest heat spots are on those lots. And if their trees aren't surviving, then it'd be nice to figure out a way to kind of connect that into this. And I'm not.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Troy mentioned about the enforcement of our current landscaping code. I mean, there is current regulations in there for development, and we just need to focus on enforcing that.
Maybe that's as you ramp up a budget to do this on the public side, that budget somehow works in unison with that private area where you do have some kind of push to get them to do what they're supposed to.
Have you given any thought to a volunteer program as far as watering? I don't know that I would trust volunteers with pruning or some other aspects of tree care, but that's a time-consuming effort for the first couple of years after a tree grows in the ground. And I would think it would be worth considering getting a staff person's, budgeting some time for a staff person to organize a volunteer effort to get members of the public to volunteer to take care of trees on their block, water them for the first couple of years.
When I was in Austin, we worked with a group called Tree Folks, and they were very instrumental helping us find groups. Actually, we just kind of handed it to them, and they went and recruited different nonprofits, the boys, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and other civic groups as well. And they actually adopted different areas to do exactly what you're talking about. What we had to do was make sure that water was nearby and available. So it might be a situation where as staff, we extend an irrigation line and make sure it's available where it's close to a grove of newly planted trees, and they would come and take care of that for us. But this all really comes down to a really big plan when it comes to irrigation. The thing that's really difficult is when we plant one little tree here and one tree there and one tree here that's a little further away. What I'm really encouraging Gary to do is really look at grove of trees. So we're planting 100 trees in one location. And that way it's a lot easier to irrigate and maintain. And the other thing that we want to look at as well, that doesn't sound so sustainable, but is actually putting an temporary irrigation system that parts of it would be abandoned after they reach a certain maturity. But the bigger parts, such as the controllers and the actual irrigation heads, we can recycle and take them to other places. But if we put a grove of trees, 100 of them in one spot, we put an irrigation system to maintain it, that cuts our man hours by thousands.
Well, nice to actually see you in person, Roy Houtman, Martin from 3rd Street Drain. So we're in communication. What's going on out there? He's been very responsive, so thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Got a question in the back?
Well, I just wanted to say, some of these new subdivisions we walk around Prairie Restoration area. That's probably to avoid property tax penalties. On whose jurisdiction is that to oversee?
I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. But you brought up a really good point that I want to talk about as well. So in the past, we had experimented with some no-mow zones where we'd really let the natural grass and the other natural aspects grow. And we tried to find some out-of-way places to do it, but we still got a lot of complaints about lack of mowing. And in those locations, we saw a lot of volunteer trees starting to grow. One of the bad things about mowing is it kills a lot of volunteer trees that are starting to grow. So part of this that I want to go back and explore, and hopefully we get a renewed interest, is finding new ways of putting no-mow zones in. And you can that's a great place to put seedlings as well, because they would have higher success of survival. So that's a strategy. You mentioned that they're doing at some developments, but it's a really good strategy in our parks. And it was met with a lot of backlash that it wasn't that, it was just people didn't understand it. I don't think they thought it was just that an area that was unmowed, unkept, and that we were purposely just doing that. Well, yes, we were purposely doing it because there was a bigger purpose behind it. But I think part of that is education, and hopefully you guys can help us with that as well.
Edges, we've discovered, work for a landscape architecture firm, and if you just let an area be unmowed, you get backlash like you wouldn't believe. But if you put an edge around it and call it a plant bed, you can get away with a lot more.
That's what I was gonna say. So there's a couple of neighborhoods out where we live, and so they leave an edge where the grass, is there, just like you said, and it's all native plants. And but some of you probably already know that native plants actually sequester more carbon than trees even. So because of the deep root system. So that's really kind of a cool thing to do. And it's yeah, I can see where you could get some backlash around here. So.
Oh yeah, there's a long history of backlash. I can tell you stories from 25 years ago.
Expensive neighborhoods, maybe don't. Just take a couple of photos to put with it or something.
And to answer your question, the places where they have big berms with the native plants on them, it's almost always under the control of the HOA for the development.
Well, we're available for more feedback. If there's any questions, I think Nina can be a point that you guys can direct your questions for us or directly to us. We also have on our website a forum where you can actually have a little bit more conversation about it. We're going to be working on this for the next 6 weeks, we think, for sure. We might have to go back to council for another workshop. And ultimately, even though this is an internal policy, we want to take this to council and hopefully they'll be supportive, and that will just give us a little bit more teeth to really implement it throughout the whole organization. This is going to be a change for Public Works, for the Water Department, for Parks and Recreation Department, how we do our operations in regards to day-to-day operations, but also our capital projects. This is a huge change for our organization. And we're working on a meeting with all the different departments to find really good procedures so we can implement this and really put this to the test. Again, I really want this to be a foundation for the community. We want to be the leaders on trying to protect our trees, and we want the other municipalities and counties to do the same. So we really thank you for listening to us, and we appreciate your feedback.
Thank you.
EFC.
Yep, EFC next. That's you.
Yeah, I guess I'm up. This took up a little bit of time, but I wanted you guys to be able to discuss EFC's final report a little bit. And this will kind of meld with our discussion about committees as well. Just thinking about how we're going to move forward. I did send you all the final report, all 100 pages of it. And I also sent an abbreviated version with the most crucial aspects in there, the projects and policies that are identified as suggested areas. So what I want to know from you guys is, what are your initial thoughts? What stuck out to you as either items that are easily achievable for the city, or high priority. I know we have a lot of priorities going on, and everything seems like it's really high priority, but you know, what do we think we can achieve? And then what do we think we can achieve through, the help of, you know, the committees that we're looking at? So, you guys have any additional thoughts or anything? I don't want to spend too much time on this because I do want us to talk about committees a little bit and some of those expectations before you guys, you know, I know there's been some concerns about time constraints as well. So we'll talk about the EFC report a little bit. Any thoughts you guys have for a little bit, and at some point, if we're going too long, we can make sure we get to committees. But
I did actually print out page 34, which is not page 34 on the abbreviated one. That was a little difficult for me to figure out, but it has a sustainability roadmap, 15 areas that they would suggest that we work on that should be low cost and could be implemented in 1 to 3 years. Greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, which we do have a committee on, sustainable purchasing, which I don't think we targeted that yet, green building, which is kind of the energy efficiency area, water savings, we do have a water committee, waste reduction, waste management, that is another committee that we have. We have a green space committee, which includes the urban trees. We do have a transportation committee, which is electric vehicles, Wichita Transit. I mean, a lot of what we've already got set for our different committees is on this list. So I thought that was really super helpful, and I actually found out things about what I was already intending to do with my committee right here in the report. So that's a good page to look at to just get their categories.
Page 10 about the abbreviated.
Thank you.
I think some of the things I saw in there were things that probably are already done, like there was something about water audit of distribution systems, or just a lot of stuff in water and wastewater that I know city is required to do and has that kind of ongoing work. So it's like,
there are a couple items in there that are either pursuing actively. So
what I wondered about is some of those ones, if there's staff or departments that are already doing that, I mean, if they could even come and talk to us about it so that we know what they're doing and how that relates, so that
Come to some of the committee meetings.
I mean, to one of these meetings, so that instead of trying to reinvent the wheel here, we know what their baseline is, so we're not thinking they are not achieving the baseline. So
yeah, and
how do we know how to improve what they're already doing? And a lot of it's probably by requirement, whether it's local
right,
or.
with the water ones, those ones I know are, there's a couple ones in that section that Public Works is doing. And so, you know, it's definitely possible to bring a staff member in to talk and give a little more context as to what the city is doing, what they're required to do. And then, you know, just in relation to that list that was identified, so that, again, we're not duplicating work. We don't want to be doing that. And then just making sure that, you know, if there are certain requirements or regulations, restrictions, anything like that, that we're being mindful of that going forward. And I think that will really come in handy with committee work, because that's going to be something that's very focused on a particular topic. And so there can be a little bit more time spent on figuring out, how do we achieve this? Is it something that we assist staff with pursuing? Is it something that we draft as the board and take it to council? What is the best, you know, path forward? So I will talk to our Public Works department and see, you know, as far as the water stuff, where we can bring in somebody for our next meeting. Or
I was thinking, like, even like on some of the building, you know, like, is there more energy efficient stuff that can be done policy put in place. Well, this MABCD, would they be helpful in kind of even understanding what is the baseline of some of the requirements out there with building codes? I mean, none of us are building code experts, I don't think.
Right. And I
So we
know,
don't know. I couldn't sit there and tell you that some of this stuff's not already being done.
right. And, you know, we did look at the list ahead of time as they were drafting, as EFC was drafting this to see sort of whose jurisdiction this would fall under. So that's definitely something we took into consideration. And we also knew that the list that they would be providing, you wouldn't be the only ones drafting policy, or that we wouldn't be the only sort of stakeholders. And so we are cognizant that we're going to need to bring other people in. And so for the time being, maybe what our priorities are ones that we can achieve as the city, figuring out that game plan of how do we build that relationship at the county level, or bringing in MABCD on a regular basis to weigh in on this, or, you know, for a set period of time for this specific project that we're interested in doing, pursuing. So figuring out that game plan. And I think that's kind of the hardest part right now, is we have a lot of options. And there's a lot of other parties that need to be involved as well. There's a lot of education that needs to happen, because we're not all subject matter experts on everything. And so I feel like that's where we're at, this sort of growing pains spot where we're trying to achieve these projects, but there's going to be some that are more difficult than others because it requires a little bit more. Not to say that we aren't going to be doing them, but I think that as we're sort of getting this off the ground, it's something to consider of what we tackle first as we get our footing, and what we tackle down the road when we can have those relationships established, have a little bit more understanding of how long each thing is going to take, and who we need involved and things like that. So I definitely see your point in that, and I think we can work to start bringing people into these meetings and get a little bit more participation from staff and other organizations, and start putting the ask out there, especially if you guys identify something that's really crucial that you want to work on that requires that outside participation. You know, we'll start forging those relationships and working what the capacity is there, and how we can achieve those specific projects or goals.
It's also interesting to think about, you know, there's so many players out there that affect, you know, we may think one thing, but then you get pushback or whatever from some other group or whatever. And it just would be good to identify them, whether they're builders, developers, or whoever it is, that you could get pushback to kind of figure out what do we all agree on and what don't we agree on. And so to me, that as I was reading through this, that those were the first things I thought about, is how do you get a consensus, you know, how do you work to build consensus so that you make progress and not just go in 100 different ways and not make any progress. That was my biggest concern on reading it.
Yeah, I agree. We something that we need to be mindful of as we move forward. And so we will, I think, you know, when we're talking about our committees right now and having 7 or so at the moment. And so, you know, we might find it difficult to juggle all these different things, especially as we're trying to build sort of consensus and education on all these different topics. Maybe we find that it is, you know, easier to educate the public than participate, but you know, who knows? You know, one of those aspects of the committees that you guys had identified last time was public education, outreach. That includes, you know, that could be anything from high school students to other entities, other jurisdictions can all be encompassed in that. And I realize that there will be overlap in different committees. Not everything's going to be sort of siloed in one of, you're tackling multiple different projects. Just to say that, we have to, I guess we sort of have to start moving in that direction before we really know what we need. And so if we can start prioritizing what we would like to see, we can then sort of lay out this roadmap of who do we need to get in contact with, who do we need to bring on board, what public entities or communities need to be engaged in these specific priorities or projects. And if we just do this basic sort of outline and then realize that this is going to be a longer project than anticipated, then maybe that's something where we still keep that in mind. But for this, for something that we want to get done right away, maybe there's something else that takes a higher priority. But I think that it's going to be really challenging to bring everybody on board until we know that we're pursuing a project and that we're serious about it. There's so many different projects right now. We can't do everything at once. So I don't want to sort of, I don't want to jump the gun and bring all these different stakeholders in and then just do nothing, not pursuing that project right now. So, we want to identify key areas, key projects, and then figure out the game plan from there. Yes, Jane.
I think the members of the committee already know this, but what is a timeline? What is the necessity of adopting or following the EFC recommendations? Does the city need to do anything with your recommendations at all? What is the reporting and the response expectation from the city manager and the city council for work of this group? I was contemplating accepting an invitation to serve on this board, and I honestly wonder if it's worth my time.
Well, my expectation or my understanding of this board is that there is public support for sustainability actions, which will then be incorporated into this board. And then we will use that to form recommendations that will go to council and to staff to formulate projects that we have identified as community priorities, because we're talking to the public. And so not everything is necessarily going to go through council. It could be something that, that staff members are working on. So there's, the ability.
You're saying that there may be more staff hired, or there might be funding to implement some of these recommendations.
Right now, there's not a line item for sustainability budget, but that doesn't mean that, projects aren't going to be funded necessarily. They could come out of other department budgets, but there needs to be a plan in place and there needs to be backing from the board and from the public to be able to pursue that. So it is possible. And down the road, we want to use that momentum to have that specific budget in the future.
So what is your idea of a timeline? So there might be 5 projects in a year. There might be some timelines established for implementation of these recommendations, or it just will take as long as it takes.
That is for the board to determine, how much we want to accomplish in a year. I know everyone is really pressed for time, especially half of our members are serving on other boards. So through the committee work, which is where we hope to get a lot of public input and priorities from community members, that's really going to be dependent on how frequently people can devote their time to that. But we are we are learning as we go, essentially. This is still a very new board.
On the other hand, other cities do have sustainability boards. I was expecting to see more of that comparison from the scanning of the EFC report that they're climbing. Honolulu has had a sustainability department for 15 years. I mean, there is precedent from other cities.
Yes, and I'm aware that, many other cities do have sustainability departments and boards. That was out of the scope of this project. These are, avenues that we can take to help get us there, but we just aren't there yet. So this is a stepping stone to get us where we need to be. And unfortunately, we're just not going to get there with one giant leap. So we have to, kind of go through the growing pains of figuring it out, and doing what we can with what we have, and then building from there.
Process of discovery. That's what it is, right? That's really what it is. It's a process of discovery.
It is. And, this board does have a goal, and that end goal is to help develop climate adaptation and mitigation plans, which is something that we all know is incredibly crucial. So there is tangible work that is going to come out of this board. It's just, it will take as long as it takes. And I know that's not always what we want to hear, but, we have finite time and finite resources. So we are going to move forward with what we have and do the best of our abilities. So I know we got off track a little bit. Let's bring it back to the projects and priority areas. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on identifying specific things right now. I know, Lori, you said that everything that was identified in the waste section was something that you were interested in pursuing through the committee work. So I don't know if there's anything else that you all wanted to bring to the board's attention at this time as priority areas. If not, I think what we need to do is talk a little bit more about committees, because there has been some concern about it is incredibly time consuming to serve on this board and another board, and also be the point person for a committee, whether that's, once every 2 weeks or, every month or what have you. So I just want to, make it known right now that how you guys formulate your committees is entirely up to you. If you decide that this structure isn't going to work or isn't feasible, then you have the power to change that. So that's, nothing's in the bylaws to say that this is what it has to be. Nothing was added, this is all based on your decision. So, I want to get your feedback right now. I know, Deborah, you had concerns.
I just flat don't have time. The MAPC, I'm the MAPC liaison to this committee, and when I agreed to do that, I was told it would be 2 or 3 meetings per year, and I just had to inform you of what MAPC was doing. Well, then it became 12 meetings a year, and now I'm suddenly a committee head, and I absolutely appreciate and agree with what this committee is trying to do, but I personally just don't see how I'm going to find the time to be a committee chair. I'm supposedly the Green Space Committee chair. I've not done a thing about that, and I don't think I will be able to. So there's a couple of solutions. I could ask to see if someone else on MAPC would be the liaison from that committee, though honestly, MAPC is an extremely time-consuming volunteer effort, and I don't think anybody else is going to have the time any more than I do to take on a whole nother role. Or if someone else wants to take on that particular committee, more power to them.
I think, it has to be you as the person who's sitting on this seat that has to be, I don't think somebody else from planning. But, you know, there is flexibility within our board to figure.
One of the things I have wondered about is how much, and it was what you basically brought up, how much redundancy, I mean, how much from the presentation that was just given, how much of what we talked about originally for the Green Space Committee projects is already being done by city staff? I'm not sure.
We only identified, you know, a couple projects that had already been in progress or completed. So majority of those projects that are listed are potential projects.
Well, that's my situation and I'm not happy about it, but I don't see how I can possibly take on the time.
We knew there was gonna be a problem with this board composition from the very beginning, and we tried to fix that before it was ever carved in stone. We did talk about that with different people. And when you have 7 that are other places also, I mean, plus their own lives, I mean, it's like this board composition was designed to be dysfunctional and protracted. That's what it seemed to me. I mean, is there any means that we can relook at the whole thing and streamline it a bit? And I mean,
Maybe after this process of discovery over the first year, after the end of the first year, then we can get that recommendation back to council, say, this format does not function, does not work. Here's our recommendations, right? That's what I say about the process of discovery. Maybe we don't need all these committees, right? Maybe we need to stream down to maybe 2 or 3, and these are all great over here, but maybe we need to look at the list and say, okay, of this list, these are the top 3 priorities. And as a whole team, we're all going to focus on these things, and where we can give, where we can give, and where, if you can, thank you for coming for the meeting that you come to for every month, right? Right, and I understand that. I'm on the board of Park Commission, right, which takes a lot of time too. People that we just come to the meeting, no, it's I get about 15 emails a week from people, you know, in my district. You know. I also get phone calls, yes.
By the 9:30 meeting tomorrow morning, waiting for, you know.
So I get that. So maybe that's this whole process of discovery. We're gonna find what works and what doesn't. And that's where we give back recommendations in the form of our vote back to the council and saying, here's our recommendations after 1 year. What does it, does not. Does that?
Yeah, I do think the possibility of condensing some of the committees so that there's maybe 2 of us on each committee.
Right.
Helping share the load.
You know, to address that, another option is to focus on, you know, some at a given time and then sort of swap, and just rotate how we're placing our focus. So that, yeah, you can have more people focusing your efforts on new priority areas. Michael, to address your point, it is laid out in ordinance how the board structure is. So that is something that would have to go to council, but that is something that as board members, if you don't feel like that's working, definitely address.
I do wonder if we're, and I haven't been to all the meetings, so I'm late a little bit to some ideas here, but I mean, in part, we form committees for things, but again, we don't know what's being done yet. And to me, is there a way to kind of go back to staff and figure out what they're doing and then really relate it to us? And then at that point, form the committees that really are important that can dive into the, whether it's low hanging fruit or whatever, that we can really shape direction and policy. But again, on the water stuff, I'm like, there's nothing I could do as a committee lead to make that any different or better. Staff is really doing that, and I could spend a lot of time chasing rabbits.
Yeah, we did identify that list. You know, I think we did request EFC take off you know, certain things that we were already doing. I think some of those maybe got missed. A couple of them did end up on the list of you know, suggested projects. I'm just trying to bring up the list.
Hey, I'm just going to jump in for just a second. This is Bailey Vieira with the Environmental Finance Center. And I just want to say that we reviewed just a whole heap of city documents, of planning documents that have been drafted and published over the last 15 years when we were eliminating potential projects for this list in an effort not to duplicate efforts. If there are some duplications on the list, it's likely due to scope or frequency, either the existing scope of the policy or project at the city isn't inclusive, or the frequency. So for example, the AWWA water distribution audit, we recommend doing that every 2 years. We believe that the city is doing that audit, but maybe not in that frequency. So, and then I heard a couple other questions I'm just going to tackle real quickly, if that's okay, Nina. I heard someone talk about existing building codes and understanding what's out there and what work is already being done. And one of the projects that we have in Bundle 4 is to perform a gap analysis on existing zoning codes to determine where changes should occur to achieve the complete streets model. So talking about that balance between what we can, like what the city can do internally versus having to bring in outside partners, a gap analysis to determine what zoning codes currently exist and then which could be changed to be more reflective of energy efficiency, landscaping, etc., could be performed, that analysis could be performed by a consultant under the guise of the city of Wichita. And then also in that same bundle, we have a facilities design requirements, which would be specific to the city of Wichita, and the facilities division happens to live within Public Works and Utilities. So our hope, again, in developing this list of bundles is that all of those programs, projects, policies, partnerships would be more easily achievable in those 1 to 3 years, not necessarily require a ton of outside influence or partners. Yes, we acknowledge that there would be some. There's also a lot of political oversight across all of the policies, because they would require internal changes in city operations, and also could, in some instances, require ordinance changes or new ordinances. But we really did try, when we were developing these bundles, to pick the projects that had the path of least resistance, and also the projects that resources could be leveraged to kind of, tackle three of the projects or programs, et cetera, with one stone kind of approach. I hope that that's helpful. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to answer some of the questions that I heard from the group.
Bailey. So yeah, and just in line with that, there are, right, some sort of ongoing projects that they identify that we should stick with. So I think what we can do here to sort of help guide this process is to really pull out anything that has not had, it doesn't have movement on, that we're not currently doing, that is not a work in progress, as focus areas for these different committees. And this is something that I can do very quickly, like tomorrow or the day after. So turn this around very fast. Philip, did you have a comment? Okay, sorry. Okay. So, with that being said, we have the full sort of, start to finish here of recommendations. I can pull out those areas, add those to you guys tomorrow. With that being said, I don't want to leave here without having an idea of how we're tackling these committees going forward. I know that's gonna be crucial because, as Lori said, she's already working to schedule some conversations on waste. Given that there are a lot of time constraints, and I know we're running out of time here, already over. Do we want to focus on, you know, 2 or 3 bigger areas or committees? And then shift our focus as we tackle some more projects down the road. I don't know that we're going to necessarily have the answers to everything right now, but I think it's some food for thought as far as how we start tackling priority areas. I know we already have, I know Laura has a couple people interested in economic development. I know there's people interested in transportation. There are people interested in every single one of these committees, but what are your thoughts on how we move this process forward?
Make it the first thing on the agenda next time.
Yeah.
Rather than at the end.
Right. And it may be that the committees that would get the most attention are the ones that people are able to lead. And if someone else doesn't want to step up to do those, like the green space that Deborah's not going to be able to lead, then
Definitely have, you know, we definitely have committees that are some more popular than others. And so that already is an indication perhaps of where priorities lie exactly. So that may be a good starting point. I would say, Lori, go ahead and, you know, this is an information gathering sort of time, as well as a time to get public input. So if you have the ability, time to meet with interested individuals, I say that the more feedback we get from people, the better. That way, we can tear it all apart and put it back together next time if we need to. I think you all have the ability to do that because nothing's set in stone. So
Go ahead and meet up with the people that have expressed interest before next time, and then we can give you more feedback.
yes, absolutely. I do want to make a few notes about that, you know, before we adjourn. I do want to be very clear that we are not, I don't want us to make promises that we can't fulfill. So we're not saying that we 100% are going to do this project, but we're going to do this forward because we are in the constraints of city budgets and politics. So just keep that in mind as you are, you know, sort of brainstorming together. Obviously, we're going to try and move a lot of things forward. We're going to do so the best we can. We want to make sure that these meetings are open to everyone. So if you're meeting in a public place, that's perfect. If you're meeting online, if you guys would send a link that way, I can send that out to people who are interested, who, you know, let me know after the fact. You don't need to record. I do recommend taking notes just for reporting, and if we do updates, time for updates next time, we can have something to report back on. The frequency of meetings is up to you all, and I know some of those groups have a lot of people who are interested. I would say, you know, schedule something that meets the most amount of people, and then still allow others to join, but not always going to meet everybody's schedule. And that's just fact of life. I would also, and we'll talk about this more next time, but you know, because budget would have to come out of another department, have to, you know, make a good argument for that. Start thinking about policies, ordinances that we can pass, because we right now have a council who is likely to pass things in our favor that are sustainability related. So I think that that's an opportunity that we should take advantage of. And that's a great place to start. Again, it's because there's so many meetings, I'm not able to attend all of them. That would be a huge chunk of time, but I am here to help. So if you need assistance, please do reach out to me, and I'm happy to assist. And anyone who is meeting with your groups, please just let me know and give me a heads up of when that is. I want to keep track of groups that are not meeting. I want to keep those people engaged, those who are interested in those committees, so that way we can engage them down the road. And then you guys can start thinking about goals and targets to adopt, but that will also come with time and perhaps might be more in line with our next meeting. Right now, I think a lot of this is going to be brainstorming and just getting some feedback from the public to see where those true priorities lie. All right, and I've taken up enough of your time, so that's all I have. Does anyone else have anything crucial for the group or part ways?
Sorry.
Okay. I have a quick question. It's
Sure.
just about the buildings themselves. So I can't really read what's on that, so that may be something that's already in place. And I can't tell from this, so just wondering what the city has implemented already for the home building and what goals are.
Yeah, so we do have, energy efficiency measures within City Hall. And, like have water bottle fill-ups and things of that nature, low flow appliances. But that's something that we could probably expand to other city facilities. So that's definitely something that we worked on as well. Taking stock of what we have where and then adjusting accordingly. So, as buildings get renovated or, like the library, the advanced learning library was hugely sustainable. But as we see these older buildings and trying to make those changes to kind of get up to that standard, it'll take a little time to sort of see where we're at and where those. So it'll definitely be, it's definitely something that we've had on our radar. Just take some thought on how to get us there.
And some money.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Nina.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm ran over a little. Appreciate your time. And we'll see you all next month. Take care.